Hello, UCAR. Peter Christensen here, coming to you from the CEO's desk. Thought I'd start 2021 off on a friendly note by bringing in our good friend, Kreg Wagner from the UAR. Hello, Kreg. How are you?
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me.
So glad you could join us. This is super fun. It's always fun for me to have, some of my colleagues and friends on these videos, and hopefully it's beneficial. I know it is because they give great information. So we're going to jump right into it. Happy New Year, everyone. Boy, there's some big expectations on 2021. I don't know how 2021 can live up to the expectations, but here we go. I think this video will start it off on the right foot. This is our gift to 2021 and putting it in the right direction.
Well, my mantra, Peter, is to undersell and over-deliver. So hopefully this video is adequate, and then we can maybe exceed those expectations.
There we go. All right. Adequate is pretty
Yeah.
much what I go for.
There you go. Perfect.
Okay. So, Kreg, going to jump right off the new year, just because the volume of calls I know you're getting, and it's just a topic that people want to talk about right now, and that is because of the state of the market with little to no inventory, and buyers agents are doing everything they can. It's a really hard market to be a buyer in right now, and so we're seeing the byproducts of that in crazy offer situations. And so let's talk first. And I know it's been talked about. You've done a post recently about it. I think Curtis did one at the Salt Lake board page, and it's just a hard one to avoid right now, and that is multiple offers. So sellers are I don't know, you'd almost wonder what was wrong with your property if you don't get multiple offers right now. And they're coming fast and furious at times. And so let's talk about, we updated recently as the forms committee the multiple offer addendum, and we did some with the time clause, and we updated that kind of part of the library to handle these. So let's talk about that multiple offer addendum, or the backup addendum. Sorry. I'm saying multiple offer addendum, and I'm talking about the backup offer addendum. So the backup offer addendum. So let's talk about how that works. And the question has come up, well, can I take 2, 3, 4 backup offers using the UAR's backup offer addendum? Tell us why that might be problematic, Kreg.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go ahead and share my screen if that's all right. And I'll just bring it up. So we have the secondary backup contract here. It is meant to make it very user-friendly. So you have a primary contract in place. So we'll just say that's buyer number 1. And then this is meant to accept a secondary or a backup contract. And that's singular. It is not meant for multiple backup buyers. And I understand the sentiment. A seller may want 2 or 3 backup buyers under contract. And I get that, more is better, maybe the mentality of a seller. But in this case, this would not be the form for that. And I'll give you an example as to why. So if you look at the language, if we look specifically at 1.4, so maybe I'll try to zoom in a little bit on this. So if you look at 1.4, it says if the primary contract is canceled or withdrawn, just termination, seller will, within 4 days after such event, provide buyer with written notice of such termination. And then, you'll see at the very last sentence, this backup contract shall become the new primary contract. So the backup buyer is then elevated based on this section 1.4, elevated into primary position. And that's one buyer. Both buyers can't, if there's multiple backup buyers, they can't all be elevated to that primary position. That would be problematic for the seller, for the buyers, and certainly for the respective brokerages. So it doesn't mean that having multiple backup buyers is illegal, perfectly fine. You can do so. It does make it much more legally complex. So what you may want to do is, one, talk to your broker, and two, possibly talk to an attorney about drafting that language. I could think of some scenarios of where, the primary offer is terminated, the buyer backs out, and if you have multiple backup buyers, you could maybe reserve the right for the seller to choose which one they want to elevate. But that language would have to be explicitly in those respective backup contracts to be binding on the respective parties.
Yeah. Very tricky. But yeah, that language is automatic. It's not a may, it's a will. And so it triggers automatically that backup buyer becoming the primary buyer. So good stuff. So yeah, I know there are probably buyers begging to be the third buyer in line. And so, but
Sure.
don't do it without having some expertise behind it and having someone who knows what they're doing craft that, because it could get your seller in some trouble. So another question that comes up, or scenario, and that leads to some questions, is the bomb of an offer that's $20,000 above list price or more, because hey, that will get me in as the buyer when I'm competing against 4, 5, 12 other buyers, depending on what price range you're in. But so talk to me about some trouble you're seeing with that scenario.
Yeah, I understand that you want your buyer's offer to stand out. You're competing against multiple other buyers. You have to be creative. You have to be aggressive. I get it. Perfectly fine. What you have to do though is be careful of the language that you're drafting in the contract. So for example, what I'm seeing recently, and it's very common. I had 3 questions just yesterday on this very point about appraisal. So buyers are doing exactly what you're talking about, Peter. They're making a super aggressive offer, 20 grand above list price, but then they put into an addendum saying, buyer is willing or shall pay, or something to this effect, that buyer will pay up to 5 grand above the appraised value, period. Right? And the purpose of that is to give the seller some assurances that this is a serious buyer, that they're willing to pay even above what the appraised value is. But I get the calls after the parties have gone under contract, after the appraisal has come in, where the appraisal comes in super low, right? And then there's questions of, well, did that language automatically reduce the purchase price to be the appraised value plus, in this case, 5 grand? And very often that language is missing. And so if the buyer really wants that to happen, or at least have that as a possibility, you're going to have to spell that out, because the purchase price is a defined term. And so not being on the same page initially can cause problems down the road, 2-3 weeks into the contract, and you just don't want to be in that position. So I've had calls on multiple scenarios like that from both sides, wondering, well, what is the purchase price now, when this is something that the 2 parties agreed to, and so it can become problematic for those parties.
Yeah, it's almost it's a similar concept to, say, the escalation clause, where you're going into a contract to purchase something, not really knowing what the price is. And yeah, unfortunately, the way we've seen that written most times doesn't seem to bind a seller, in that it just says buyer is willing. That's, well, great. Thanks for letting us know in your addendum what the buyer's willing to do. But I, as the seller, am not willing to sell it to you for that price. So there we have it. I've got 3 backup offers now. willing to pay higher. So yeah, interesting stuff. So what would you recommend if a buyer is coming in and wanting wanting to differentiate their offer? What are things they can do to differentiate their offer that you see that our forms work in harmony with?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'll be the first to admit I'm not a practitioner. I mean, I advise on this, and so I hear
Neither of
the
us
things that go
really
on.
knows what we're talking about, is what you're saying. But yeah,
Yeah,
keep going. Keep going.
yeah. It's. I mean, obviously, I talk about the most basic things like earnest money, right? So having earnest money that is a higher dollar amount, that shows that you're pretty serious. Um, I think that's important. I think that protects both sides, to be frank, for a buyer and a seller when you look at the remedies for default under Section 16. So earnest money, certainly deadlines play a role, allowing the seller some flexibility, because as you correctly noted, there is limited inventory. Well, where's the seller gonna move into? What property are they going to use to replace the property that they're selling? That's caused a bottleneck in this market right now. So one of the forms that the UAR has created is um, allowing the seller some time to find a replacement property and giving the seller the right to cancel. So really, if a buyer is looking for a way to distinguish their offer, maybe they include that as part of their offer, this new UAR form that's been updated. I get that it could be, the buyer may end up not getting that property because of that, but it does distinguish their offer. Probably the last thing that I can think of is, and I get a lot of calls about this section, is under the financing section. It's 8.3BI, where you're
I was
allowed
hoping
to.
you'd plug that. If you weren't going to, I was. But yeah.
Yeah, you're allowed to put a portion of the earnest money and make it non-refundable if the buyer ends up canceling after due diligence, but before the financing and appraisal deadline for a financing reason. Really, if they just provide notice of cancellation and nothing else, that's the reason why they're canceling. And so more and more sellers are asking for that because they're taking their property off the market for an extended period of time. And because it is such a broad right to cancel, they're saying, buyer, let's put some additional skin in the game. So buyers that do that, it does make their offer stand out a little more significantly without increasing the purchase price. So I'm just thinking of ways that are beyond just the normal, oh, I'll pay $5,000 above the next time. I mean, I'm talking about kind of practical ways that aren't as burdensome for a buyer. So something like that could be a way to make your offer stand out a little more to a seller.
I like it. Really quickly, maybe this is impossible really quickly to hit this one, but you brought something up that I'm hearing a lot that's going on, and that is allowing the seller to stay. So you've got really sort of a lease situation that takes place after the settlement and closing on the property. Quickly, maybe hit some of the issues that pop up with that and a good way to approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me, if you don't mind, let me share my screen again. So if you look at section 3.2, this is, or 3.3, I should say, this talks about possession, when the buyer should expect to receive the property from the seller. But it also talks about any contracted rental of the property prior to or after closing between buyer and seller shall be by separate written agreement. So I would have something that spells out what are the respective obligations, because if you put any time period, so let's say you put in 10 calendar days after recording, by default, you are now a landlord buyer. You just are, because you now own the property. Someone else is living in the property. I don't care if they used to own it. You're now a landlord, and the other side's now a tenant. So having something in writing and agreed to is going to help spell out any sort of issues that could go wrong and expectations. I'm all about clear communication and avoiding those types of issues before they become a problem. I want the contract, and in this case, the lease agreement, to address specific issues so that it's clear, the expectations are set. There's no misunderstanding who's responsible for what and what condition the property needs to be delivered in. So I would certainly advise that that if you're going to do something, you have a short-term rental agreement. The UAR has that, or to have an attorney help you draft a lease agreement just to spell out those expectations.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. Most of the time, I understand, 2, 3, 5 days. Most of the time, probably nothing goes wrong and it's fine. But you are absolutely in a landlord-tenant situation, and suddenly you have risk of loss issues. You have damages to the property. You have things that go wrong, a pipe breaks, something, who's responsible for it. All those things can be spelled out in a little lease that you attach to it. So
Well,
absolutely.
and let me give you another example. So I would spell out rent and I would spell out damages and things of that nature, not because you want to enforce it, not because you want to use it as a stick to hang over the tenant or the former owner of the property. But I have had a number of calls where the buyer's agent's calling me saying, hey, we had a short-term lease agreement, or we didn't have a short-term lease agreement. And you know what? The seller's not moving out.
They're still there.
They need additional time. They want to take a month or so.
Shocker,
And
their backup offer did not get accepted, and they're starting over.
And so now you get into the point of, well, I have to go through the eviction process. What am I going to try to pursue as far as damages when we didn't spell out what rent payments were going to be?
Treble damages by statute, right?
Yeah, you times that by 0. I mean, what exactly are you going to be doing? I mean, so I would just spell it out, not because, again, you want to use it as a stick, but so then it protects you, and it's a way to maybe put some pressure on the seller/tenant, if they do refuse to move out. Because you're right, treble damages, that's very landlord friendly, but you need to have some basis to calculate those treble damages.
Right. And as I always say, good contracts make good friends. So just you're asking for a better relationship in the end if you have everything spelled out in those contracts. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're out of time, Kreg, but thank you so much for jumping on with us. We appreciate your time. You're looking well. I think the holiday was good on you, Kreg.
Oh, I appreciate it. I'm surprised. I'm in my basement right now. I'm surprised the kid hasn't run down and interrupted us. So we may want to end it before someone does that. There's a good chance someone will, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened.
I understand. Well, as always, this is legal information only. This is not intended to be legal advice. If you need specific legal advice, contact your attorney. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and have a great day.